Well, hello everybody. My name is Karen Stahlberg, and I am both an OBGYN and a clinician educator here at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And we are here in the offices at the Department of Learning Health Sciences. And I'm here with my colleague Astrid Fistrup. So what we are going to try to do is talk about flipped classrooms. And when I say flipped classrooms, what I mean is having folks do work before they come to class, using the time when everyone is together in the room for more advanced learning, and then there's other ways to engage the learners while you're in the room with them. So I always start a conversation about what are our intended learning outcomes today. So hopefully by the end of our discussion together, you'll be able to understand the reason to use the flipped classroom pedagogy. We'll look at active learning techniques that you can try in your environment. And then thinking about the ways that you already teach, might there be a possibility to flip the classrooms that you already have or the classes that you're using? So what I'm very much hoping is that today can be a coming together of how to think and solve and also use technology. And what I'm hoping is that we don't flip the car and get into a disaster. So to that end, I want to try and use something called Poll Everywhere. So this is an example of a way to engage learners no matter where they are in your environment. So the way that we started this session was to distribute a reading that hopefully people had the opportunity to look at. If you didn't, that's okay. And then I also distributed a set of questions for people to look at to basically reinforce the reading that you did. And so in a typical flipped classroom, we might start with a quiz, but don't worry, there's no quiz, promise. But I wanted to test this technology. So we're going to either, you can use your phone, or you can use, if you're on a computer and you have a computer in front of you, we can try to sign into Poll Everywhere. So basically what you'll do is if you're using a web browser, then you actually can go to this web address with the backslash, and you type in the code for my quiz right now. Or if you're using a text, then you should be able to text to that phone number there, and then everybody's responses are anonymous. So, but with Poll Everywhere, you can actually set it and invite people to the polls so that you can keep track of your learners and see how they're doing. Astrid is using her phone here to try it as well. Nice, excellent.
I just downloaded the app off of the Google Play Store, and then it just said join a presentation. So I typed in C. Stahlberg 974, and then I was automatically brought in. So I didn't have to do the text or anything. I just got it straight through the app.
Perfect. Yes, helpful. And thank you for sharing that. I did not know about download speeds and if the app would work, but Daniel, you raise a great point, which is that you could also have people prepare by downloading the app before they come to class or to the webinar if you're doing things remotely, so that then they have the app directly. So we're going to try again and see. Like I said, I put things alphabetically. So Ethiopia is A, Rwanda's B, and the world is C. And so if you can just enter in A, B, C to say where you are, what should happen is that it'll start populating. But it didn't populate. So that's okay. We'll just keep going. I don't want to waste people's time. The good news is that I did not do this through the whole presentation because I thought, what if it doesn't work? So, and then what I thought we would do is share what type of health professional you are so that people get a sense of who all is in the room. We already did that through our introductions, but as part of Poll Everywhere, this will also allow you to type in a response. And this slide is set so that it will create a word cloud so that you can see the larger responses, the larger number of responses will be in a bigger font size so that you can tell proportionally what number and types of folks you have in the room. So we're just going to keep moving. And I wanted to start with the really important fact that everyone who teaches in medical education or health professions education really has not gotten any good training in pedagogy. We really are taught to sort of do what we know, and we model what we have seen or how we have taught. Now, what's nice is that we have selection bias all together in this conference right now because everyone here is a medical educator and considers themselves as such, but that's more of a rarity than a sort of global statement, if you will. And most of us use primarily lectures. Some of us try to do discussion forums. Now, I'm going to be called out because clearly one of our colleagues is in the simulation center right now, but not a lot of folks engage in simulation for a variety of reasons. The other thing that we all know is that PowerPoint overload can be very tough, right? In a lecture, you have a small amount of time to deliver a lot of information, and so it can just feel like this droning on of reading PowerPoint slides. The other challenge always is going to be space and time, as we know, and then our learners always follow the way we lead. So if we are testing them with memorization and with multiple choice questions, then really what they want from us are the answers and not necessarily ways to use or engage with the information. So I was going to try another Poll Everywhere, but since we have the ability to go around the table with smaller group, how about why don't we talk about where most of us do our teaching? So if you could, just go around the areas and say, where do you do your teaching? Whether that's in a lecture hall, in simulation, operating room, clinic, that kind of stuff.
I help make videos for flipped classrooms.
Excellent. Where were you a few weeks ago? It's awesome. Yeah, so I personally teach a variety of places. So one-on-one with students in a clinical setting, with residents in the operating room, online, large lecture formats. So we'll keep going here. And obviously we've talked about the foundational knowledge that can be gained outside of class and maximizing our time together. So one of the things that I hope I modeled was distributing a document early before you guys came into the seminar with some questions. And that document is called The Flipped Classroom, From Theory to Practice in Health Profession Education. And it really does a very nice job of a big overview, although lots of theory, I know, to talk about why a flipped classroom, what are the ways to engage learners, what are some options that you can use. So the theory behind getting folks to be active in a classroom is to encourage mastery learning. And by engaging with mastery learning, you promote the retention and the transfer of knowledge and skills. So it's not enough for me to just give you information. It really works best, as you know, if you can work through it and apply it and really make it stick for yourself. The other thing that is important is that deliberative practice improves performance. And so we all have been sent home with a workbook full of homework to do the work at home. But what would it look like if you actually did that hard work of thinking about problems and working through problems as a group together? And the studies have shown that you actually can do more, and the students learn more by being together and working through problems. The other notion is this idea of cognitive apprenticeship, where you watch how the expert thinks through things or works through a problem, and then you learn the approach to the problem. So many of us learned how to change a tire on our car by watching our fathers do that. And the important part of cognitive apprenticeship, though, is that the expert breaks down their thought process and breaks down the process for why they're doing things. Because if you don't understand why someone is making the choice they're making, then that's difficult. So you can imagine that there's some teacher training that goes into this as well. So if we put the two kind of standard things right next to each other, in lecture-based classes, students show up, they may read, they probably don't. They just show up and expect us to pour the information into them. In the class, we lecture, and they get the material for the very first time. And then after class, that's when they have to do their work to try to understand the material. In a flipped classroom, the students at least gain some exposure to the material ahead of time. And then when you're in class, to sort of ensure accountability, you can do a quick quiz. The other thing that's nice about those quick quizzes is they can count towards a grade. So rather than waiting the whole semester to get all sorts of data, you can actually start collecting small pieces of evidence to say that actually students are learning. And then while you're in class, the faculty is the guide, and the students are the ones actually doing the heavy work, right? Because they're collaborating, practicing, applying. So you've got all these eager students in the classroom looking at you saying, now what do we do? Because we did all this reading, and you say you want us to be engaged, and you're not going to talk directly at us. So I want to take a second in this presentation to talk about active learning techniques. And you should have also received a handout that has this image on it. One side has this sort of stair ladder, really, if you will, of different types of active learning techniques from the lower left-hand side, which are simple, to the upper right-hand side, which are more complex and take a lot more planning and timing. It's a 2-page document. This side is the image. On the other side, there's actually a listing of and an explanation of all those different techniques. But I wanted to highlight just a few for you. So the first one that's very easy to do is a reflection. And basically what it does is it provides a few moments for the students to answer a question. And when you ask the question, it should require some thought and integration of the information that either they were expected to know when they came into the room or that they're going to gather while you're talking. So a great example would be, what are the challenges of a webinar? And so if I pause and allow people the opportunity to think about it, many of us could come up with lots of answers. So we could unmute the microphones, and I'll talk about what are the challenges of this type of instructional method. I don't think we need to do that, but another way to approach it would be something called a minute paper. So if folks are shy or you have a lot of people in the room and you don't have time to go through everyone responding to their reflection, you can do something called a minute paper, where you actually ask students to take out a blank piece of paper. You can have them answer a question about the reading, the preparatory material, or you can pause in the middle of class and do the take out a piece of paper routine and then have them answer a question about what they just learned. So an example for us could be a minute paper about describing the reasons why flipped classrooms foster learning. So if we took the time, it would enable you to consolidate the information you've heard so far and write it down for yourself. If you want to try that while we're in the room together, you should definitely do that and see how that feels to you. As it turns out right now, because I'm in presenter mode, I actually can't see you guys. So if anyone has a question or a concern, please just speak up and let me know, and we can slow down a little. So another really nice technique, when you have a lot of people in the room and you also have learners who are engaged and who have done work before and are listening while you're there, is to have them do what's called a think, pair, share. So you provide a question that is a challenge or is an issue that you want them to discuss. They think on their own to come up with their own answers and ideas. Then they pair with the person next to them to have a conversation about, well, what did you think about this issue? What do you think? And then the pairs report back to the larger group for everyone to come to a solution. So another great example that we could do would be, what ways could you flip your class? And so a way to operationalize that right now would be to say, okay, we're going to take 2 minutes for each of you to think about flipping your class. And then we'll take 5 minutes for you to work together in pairs to share your ideas. Then we would take time to report out to one another. And then we would move on to the next item. So last night I was actually at a celebration dinner for faculty who had graduated from an 18-month program to learn about how to teach in an interprofessional environment. So folks from dentistry and nursing and medicine and pharmacy were all together thinking about how do we teach our learners in the same space. And we did this think, pair, share exercise using a document that we had all created about what are our challenges around teaching in an interprofessional space. And you can imagine, no clinic time, people aren't together, you know, where could we actually find places and spaces where people are working together? And we went through this exact same exercise. And it worked really well because we came out with a number of action items that we're all going to work on together as a faculty. So I share this story because these flipped classroom activities can be used really with any type of content. They could be used for faculty development, they can be used for teaching. It really is a great technique that gets people involved in your discussion. Another really nice pedagogical technique, and again, I'm moving up from left to right on that simple to complex line of different ways to engage active learning, is to use case studies. So because we all have lots of stories from our clinical experience, we have real life stories that we can utilize. The students then work through the cases to learn the specifics. And a shameless plug, we will be doing a workshop on how to build your own cases and to think about how to work through cases with your learners. And that will be on June 11th. Apologies to our colleagues in Rwanda because I know that this is a Tuesday. We can look and see about options to change or do it twice, or I have to look at my calendar, but we can see what we can do. And then finally, one of the really biggest challenges, but one that works great, is something called a jigsaw discussion. So each student becomes an individual expert on some topic. We're actually going to be using this tomorrow with learners. We're going to give them different articles to read in class. So each student there'll probably be 2 or 3 students reading one article, 2 or 3 students reading a second article. We'll take the time for them to read it individually, Then they'll get together as groups to confirm what they read, to teach each other about the individual pieces. Then everyone will come together, and the group who did the yellow piece will teach everyone else about their paper. And the group who did the blue piece will teach everyone else about their paper. So that by the end of the event, everyone will learn all of the information. The benefit there is that people learn first by being exposed to the information. And then, as you know, you really get deep learning when you explain it to someone else. And then the other piece is that it actually saves time in many ways for all of the other learners because they are taught by their peers. And they'll have access to the original articles from the very beginning. So if they want to go back and do a deep dive, then they can do that for themselves as well. So we're close here. I want to just take a moment for all of us to think about the things that I've modeled so far. So I am actually going to escape from the presentation so that we can all see each other.
What I have learned is that in flipped classroom, we can use case studies and reflections of what we have learned before. And also when students are working in groups, is better than working on himself or herself.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that. And what I tried to do with this presentation as well was to show how you can distribute information beforehand, try to work things in the room. And then the other piece that I'll do afterwards is actually distribute the sort of answers, if you will, to that worksheet, and then include distribution of the videotape from this discussion, as well as a follow-up article that actually kind of helps bring things all together.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The Poll Everywhere is a great example of how things cannot work if you try to get too engaged with technology. So I'm going to go to the next slide, I think. There we go. So this is, and I'm going to stay out of presentation mode mainly so that I can continue to see the chat, if that's okay with everyone. So this was the article that was distributed before class, or this presentation. It was called The Flipped Classroom, From Theory to Practice in Health Professional Education. And I want to have you, when you get the copy of it, to really look at the 4 different tables because they show the table 1, which has evidence-based tips for developing video or reading material. So again, how much to have people read, different ways to create the videos, and a really nice conversion table of how long it takes not only to read something before class, but also to listen and to think about it. So we as experts might take 30 minutes to read and understand an article. But because it's very new to the students, that could be 45 minutes. And so when we assign something outside of the class, we have to really think about how much time do students have to dedicate to pre-reading or pre-work. And you don't want to sort of overload them beforehand with all this information, because when people feel overloaded, as you know, we just kind of back up and we don't engage. The other thing that's really important, right, is that we have to, in some way, assess our learners, test them, understand whether they're learning or not. And there are a bunch of common assessment approaches in the flipped classroom, whether those are minute papers, If you do a pop quiz, if you do essays, you are options so you could have the students grade one another on their participation. That can be pretty hard, but again, lots of ways to collect evidence to show that your students are actually working and learning the material. And then the nice table is table 4, which is a large summary of their recommendations about how you can take a class that you already have and flip it and see how that works. As you can see in the chat, Kathleen has graciously shared information about BlueJeans and maybe other polling ideas. You know, I'm not sure. I'll be interested to hear your feedback about whether or not doing poll everywhere in this type of situation works. Another thing that I've seen done, which also works for polling, is to take different color index cards, so yellow, blue, orange, green, so that then you can actually hold up the answers to A, B, C, D in the room. It works great in a very large lecture hall because nobody needs their phone, and as the lecturer, you can also see whether or not people are understanding the information. Because if the right answer is the yellow card for A and everyone holds up a green card, then you know that somehow there was a missed communication. So just one more technique of how to get around technical glitches, which we all have all the time. So this next article that I want to show, which is one that we will share with you after this presentation, is from the same group, so McLaughlin, talking about the specifics of how in a College of Pharmacy in North Carolina in the United States, they flipped the classroom. And what you can see is that they really took a lot of, on the left side of the diagram, took a lot of their content out of the time in the room. And they put a lot of self-paced learning. So they had online modules and online quizzes for the foundational information. And then they had some assigned reading. But if you look at that time, it was 35 minutes to do the videos and 45 minutes to do the time. So that's a very big commitment for the learner to put in before they come to class. And then the way they structured class was they did an assessment of foundational learning. So basically they did a pop quiz when you walked in the room to say, yep, I prepared and I was ready. They did a pair share where they taught one another. They did student presentations and discussions, so people taught each other. There were little itty bitty, what they called micro lectures to reinforce principles within the class time. And then there was a quiz at the end. So in the dark boxes, it says 35 minutes, 15, 20, that's like an hour and a half of time within class as well. And then
oh, sorry, Karen, can you actually make this one full screen? It seems like a really intriguing graphic, but we can't read any of the text in it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Is that a little helpful?
It's still small, and we're looking at a very big screen.
Yeah, no, I know.
But we can see more of it.
Yeah, and I will distribute it for sure. But the thing to notice on the right-hand side is the key. So there's a little house that says this is where their activity occurs in their house. There's sort of teacher time where everybody's together. And then there's students working together in groups as well. And then afterwards, the way they do the assessment is there's multiple choice questions, there's short answers, there's essays. They get graded on their quizzes, their in-class quizzes. They get graded on their engagement. They get graded on any projects they do, etc. So as you can imagine, it takes a lot of work to flip a class. So you may want to think about, rather than flipping your entire class, maybe to just do little bits at a time. With that last paper that I showed you, their conclusions are actually that the way they actually, I give them credit because they published sort of a negative results paper, if you will, just to say we did all of this. Our students did perform better, but boy, it was really a lot of time, it was a lot of commitment from our learners, and we're going to adjust what we do. In this way, you can see they sort of threw everything together instead of kind of doing a stepwise approach. So what I would recommend as you're thinking about flipping your classrooms or engaging learners is to consider really small changes and to make sure that you message it to your students. Because if you have one faculty member who has decided to flip their classroom, but everyone else is doing lectures and the students don't have to engage, then you will be the one faculty member who nobody likes because you're making students do too much work or you're an outlier, etc. So it has to be a concerted discussion. So now I feel like I've been talking a lot and I don't want to talk so much. So I'd love for you all to share your ideas. And I have popped back out so that I can see the chat room if it's easier to chat rather than speak by the webinar. So what things do you see in this presentation that you could apply to some of your learning areas?
So in Ethiopia and in Rwanda, we have created video objects, I think you call them. We've created video lectures to be used as a phase-in to the use of a flipped classroom. And I'm just interested to hear from my colleagues if any of those have been used or if there's been a way that they've been introduced or if that's still in abeyance. The lectures are all still available via the CERT website under Learning Materials. So I was just wondering, some of you have participated in those activities, how they have or have not been used and what the barriers might be to using those.
In Rwanda, what we have seen is that faculty are using those videos for teaching, and they are very helpful because they are culturally sounded, and many of them are their teachers, so they are aware of the videos, and students are using them to study.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Jumed.
Yes, boss. How are you?
Good. What's your feedback on the videos that we made?
So far, I have not really started using them very well. This morning, I wanted to use them in the simulation so that we post them fast, but the Bosco was not around to give me the compiled one. So for sure, next Tuesday, I will use it.
So that was a technological barrier to using it.
Exactly. Well, I think not really. Maybe it's our mistake. We did not take time to gather them and see them and just try them before we start using. We don't want to be really ridiculous. I think next time will be better.
What
Yeah,
about sorry.
No, please go ahead.
What about Bekaloo? Because you were there at the first creation, the first boot camp. What have you found in terms of people using or not using the videos?
I really don't have any feedback yet.
like in our situation, like those resources are given for the different institutions to be used as for the flipping classroom purpose, but some of them they are not using them very well, and those that they are using them, they use them as a reference material, not a lot of, using them to flip the classroom. So the students and the faculty, they use them as an additional resource for the teaching activity.
Thanks.
Yeah, so it's Karen here
In
again.
regard to that, our students are overburdened with a number of courses and modules, and they have a huge credit hour that they need to complete within a defined period of time. So do you think it's possible to use flipping classroom from the article that you have sent for us? There is a time suggestions which even doubles the credit hour.
Yeah, so what we have done, and we've struggled with the time piece as well, and that's why I really brought it up, because if you imagine every single class requiring out-of-class activity before in-class time, in some ways it could be double time. So one thing we did with our schedule is we built in pre-work time, if you will. So Monday afternoons, there are no lectures scheduled because we expect students to do the pre-work for the coming week. We also have time built in on Thursday for them to do their own pre-work again as well. That then means less in-class time, and so teachers were getting very anxious about, well, how can I teach all my material? And so by purposefully looking through the videos that you have and having people see them beforehand, you can actually start off, you can start the conversation from the end of the video, so that when you're all together in the room, you're talking about, tell me the 3 things you need to think about when you put in an intrauterine device. What are the 3 most important things for the patient to think about, right? So you can have them apply the information that they learn at that time. How do you know that someone might be having a miscarriage? And again, it's the application of the information. The other thing that's really important, and I know you know this because you experienced it, but the time it takes to make and plan those videos is a lot. And so having a purposeful discussion with faculty around, here's what we have, here's how you can use it, try just one and see how that works. What ends up happening is it's sort of this feed forward, which is that the students become exposed to the videos. They like watching the videos beforehand. They come to class and then they'll start saying, well, why didn't we watch the video before we came? And your teachers will say, what do you mean? What kind of videos? And then you'll start to get this culture expansion of, hey, we'd really rather see videos, or we'd really rather read a textbook, or et cetera, before they come in to the classroom situation. Same goes for simulation, is to think about what are the foundational information they're going to need before they come to the simulation. Are there videos they can see or watch so that when they get into the simulation space, you're ready to go with your simulation curriculum? Other questions or thoughts?
This is Makdam again from St. Paul's. So I was wondering why we shouldn't try on something much easier, because videos are very expensive, and they take longer time to produce and upload, and there are going to be a lot of things. As you had it in the reference, why don't we try to use articles or probably even the PowerPoints rather than going to a higher order?
He's frozen.
Uh-oh, we lost him.
Well, we lost our other St. Paul's colleague, so I think they probably just got a power outage. And oftentimes they'll return back within a couple minutes, but I think we can proceed and then bring them back into the discussion.
Yeah, it's a great point, which is you don't have to be fancy. You can either use videos that are already existing. You can create reading or create a syllabus of articles or workshop materials. With PowerPoint, you can do voiceovers, so you could even distribute the PowerPoint with voiceover. I think one size doesn't fit all areas, and so knowing the variety of options and what could be used is, I think, useful, right? To have a full toolbox of things that can help you.
Go ahead.
It's just homework, isn't it?
Well, it's changing what you do. It's really flipping what you do in class versus at home.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Dr. Burhanu has been politely raising his hand.
Sorry.
That was a great presentation. Thank you very much. That was very enlightening. I'm not I'm not involved in education that much. Maybe my only education maybe with my kids. But as a learner, what I've seen with some of the coursework is that a lot of pre-readings are actually given, for the flipped class, and there doesn't seem to be a focus, from the courses that I've taken, from the instructors, because I think maybe if you can highlight the importance of that, what you've showed us is tools, I would say, not attributes of an educator in terms of making sure they actually distill the material to the bare minimum so that students actually can prepare, and a lot more time could be spent on probably discussing relatively complex ideas or ideas that are going to be posted. But it seems for example, I get references to read 5 papers and maybe 3 videos, and I mean like you were saying, I get overwhelmed, and I may not even I may start at one of the the least important papers, and then I go to the class, and I don't see any added value coming up. So what would be your advice apart from using the tools about the attributes of the educators? Isn't it true whatever capacity a good instructor has is also important in a flipped environment?
Yeah, so that speaks to the need to really have teacher preparation to think about what it is you want the learners to be able to do or know or show at the end of the session. And so just like you're asking them to do pre-work, as the faculty member, you have to be very intentional in how you pick the videos or the articles. The way I constructed the pre-work quiz can also help the learner focus on what's important, right? As opposed to, in table 2, how many people were in this trial, right? That's a factoid. That's not a a thing that signals to the learner that this is really important. So you can create ways through the material, almost like a guide. So you're really sort of a guide on the side to help them. Once they've come into class, you shouldn't re-lecture the material. Like that, it shouldn't be that because the folks who took the time to do the pre-work, when they come to class, they want to hit the ground running. And if you show people, well, you can get away without preparing to class, then everybody will stop preparing. But if when they come to class, they know that they're going to have to teach each other, they're going to be asked thought questions or ways to learn about the material and apply it in a new scenario. That's sort of where the case studies come in, is the case studies force a higher engagement with the material because you can tell the story, which is, a 45-year-old woman who has 3 children and has heavy periods is coming to get help, right? And then that's how you start the case. And then it's what does she want to do? What do you need to know, etc. And so it's a lot of, in some ways you can't just like show up and tell what you know as the teacher anymore. You really have to prepare and you really have to map out what it is you want people to learn and then purposely select the articles, purposefully create study guides. Other techniques that can work really well is a note sheet for your lecture that is basically a high-level outline that students can then write in and fill in the answers, if you will, or the important points as you're discussing the information. Because basically then what you've done is scaffold or create sort of a structure for them to recognize what's important, listen, so they have to actively listen. And then we know from cognitive science that physically writing something out helps it stick better than if you don't write it out. Let me pause there and make sure we get more questions in.
So,
Hello?
hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
So, I'm Meher from St. Fox. So, it was disconnected because of the light. So, just to raise one of our challenge. We were trying to use this flipped classroom, like by giving them certain topic to read on that and to present it before the main session or before the lecture. But I found out that just few of the students came with reading, and many of them they didn't come with the reading. So it was challenging for me how to proceed with the topic I gave to them, because I just prepared only a few slides on the topic which was not given to them as an assignment.
Yeah. How could you engage the students who had done the pre-reading to have them read their colleagues? Would that have worked?
How many of them can prepare?
Maybe from the from 30 students, only maybe 5 of them they came with reading.
Yeah.
So I just gave them, few of them to share. Yes, 2 of them they just came out in front and they tried to share what they have already read.
Yeah. So in a way, what you did was convert it to a jigsaw, where there were some student experts in the room who then taught each other. Some of it is setting expectations, meaning, okay, you guys see that I really did mean that you should read before you have. I really did mean it. And it's with consistency, with coming the next time to the class, doing the same thing, then they'll learn. But oh no, we really do have to read beforehand. That's what I was meaning by making sure that everyone is using the same technique. Because if you're the only one flipping a class, then they're like, oh, that doctor doesn't know what they're doing. That doctor is crazy. Everybody else lectures to us. That's all we're doing. Because, we're all human, excuse me. We'll go to the easiest part if we can. So I would say clear messaging, give them time to understand that this is going to happen. So using small topics as opposed to a whole class. Getting feedback to see how it worked for them, how it could be expanded. Sharing with your other faculty. So in your faculty meetings, say, hey, let's 5 of us decide that we're going to do this week. We could have, I don't know, you could make it a game. You could do flipping Fridays. And so every Friday, we're going to do a flipped classroom type of experience. Little doses to then get it be a normal occurrence. Other questions? Happy to answer and think together, because that's, I always learn when I'm together with other educators.
The blackout took us away. Now we're back. So, I just wanted to mention one of the experiences we had. Actually, it was my only experience. So what we had was, I gave them this assignments, and then it was on a topic. I gave them the foundations, and when they came back, I made sure that they are divided into 4 groups, and then I gave them the different topics, and then after 10 minutes of discussion, every group is going to present, and after that, we would conclude that with another 5-minute briefings, and then now we'll finally go to the real application and how to do the actual investigations, and the management part will be the one that I'll just be presenting. So we tried it on 2 or 3 occasions, but as you said, I was considered the crazy one, and we couldn't proceed so far because most people are not really into this thing. So I'm really happy about this Crazy Fridays you talked about, and actually we were also talking about doing this flip class to the probably more prominent or more important or selected topics. I don't know how we can choose those, and probably start with that and then proceed eventually. Now, uniformly, what we're doing this flipped classes to our seminars, I think it's also done in the Department of Gynae strongly. So whenever they come for a seminar, we'll have a pretest, and this pretest will have its grade, so that we make sure that whenever we have seminars, they'll have a pretest that will count on their final progressive assessment. So if we do use this widely in our flipped class, probably it's going to be a good assessment, and we can make sure that they do adhere to, or understand how the flipped class works, and get motivated by the marks, and there will be some enforcement.
Yeah, and the other thing that it does is it encourages people to stay current with the material. So many people have the habit of, they know the quiz is in 2 weeks, so they won't study until the week before because they prioritize other things. But if you continue to use a flipped classroom with activities that count towards their grade, then they stay current with the discussion and with the material. one of the biggest pieces is organizational change, right? So someone with authority or the ability to say, by January of 2020, 50% of our classes will use a flipped classroom technique, where we're going to expect our students to be prepared when they come into the room. It's a big goal, but at least someone plants a flag that everybody sort of heads towards. And the other thing is, when you're the first one out of the gate, it's very hard to get traction. And so you just have to keep working and keep going and keep showing people how it works, because I'm quite sure that the students speak highly of the events afterwards, particularly if you see them over time. So if you see them for foundational material and then they come to your clinic and you can reference, hey, do you remember when we did that flipped room where we talked about this and you guys did those small groups, and now here we are in the clinic or the hospital and we're seeing the same thing. So trying to help weave the threads through the curriculum is also another way to help signal to the students that this matters and that it's important. But yeah, the educators are the crazy ones. Other thoughts or questions? We just have probably 10 minutes left or so.
My concern is on the students' burden calculation. According to the article you provided previously, for example, for this 3-credit course, there will be 3 hours, up to 3 hours pre-course assessment and 3 hours after course work. So if you calculate it, these 3, and if we may use the ECTS time calculation, we need to include also self-study. So the time calculation will go beyond the provided credit hour. How can we adjust this?
Yeah. So one of the things we've started doing is our foundational time for foundational lectures. We had been doing 2 years foundation and 2 years clinical, and many schools are starting to spend less time in the foundational part, and then when people are in a clinical environment, actually using that opportunity to teach foundational material. So we talk about something called teaching scripts, and I'm going to write it in the chat room, so that you can have a ready-made, 3 slides or 4 talking points, that when you see a case or an example, that you can remind people of the basic science. So one of the things that I talk about is reminding folks about the coagulation cascade and arachidonic acid, and right. So really incorporating 2 minutes worth of basic science into that clinical moment. And instead of knowing all the basic science, the reason why we call it teaching scripts is so that then you can have the script that you use, 2 or 3 all the time. So one that I used to use when I was delivering babies was to talk about why the umbilical cord stops pulsating, and to help people remember the conversion of the fetal circulation to adult or extrauterine circulation. I have a friend who does the arachidonic acid. You could do, when you're talking about asthma, you could do a quick teaching script on reminding people about flow volume loops for pulmonary function. So what we did is we found ways to move it somewhere else instead of cramming it all into 2 years. But again, it takes intentional planning, because you're absolutely right. The students, like, you just can't give them that much work. We can't even do that. Oh.
I have a comment about that. Looking at that table 4 that Azev mentioned that has the calculations about the ratio of in class versus out of class. I mean, like you said, Karen, one of the things is just setting expectation for students about how much time to spend outside of class. Because even looking at that ratio of spending, basically twice as many hours outside of class as in class, what I was taught for both my bachelor's and both my master's is that you spend really up to 3 hours outside of class for every single credit hour. And Dr. Berhanu's nodding.
Yeah.
That was also the expectation for him. So we were actually given the expectation of spending way more time than this graphic even shows for, self-study as well as preparation for class.
Right. And, like, flipped classrooms are not necessarily new for literature classes or art history class, right? People do read the book before they come to class. I think from a medical student standpoint or health profession standpoint, it's important to recognize that the students they're not only students, right? There's so much more going on in their lives. And they have to balance, and we think a lot about what we're calling burnout, which is like just the overwhelming amount of information we're trying to get people to learn. And so making sure that in the curriculum there are multiple places where people can learn important topics, and that they will learn how to do different things because they see it in different places and spaces. So, cardiology gets reinforced when you're in a renal unit because you have to think about renal function, to do cardiac stuff. So, I think starting in little bits, we have the luxury of having lots of students who will try lots of things. The other thing to remember is that stuff that gets published, may not have been thoroughly tested or is an extreme example. Like, you don't have to do everything necessarily in the article, but I think just little starts is helpful. I chose that article, the beforehand article, because of the theory that was in there. Nobody likes to be lectured to about theory, that's for sure. And so I thought having you guys look through it beforehand would provide some background, and if you wanted to do deeper dives, you could. This next article that I'll send out that basically says, yeah, we tried all of these things and it was way too much time, and the students said, no, you can't do it. And then they revamped the timing and the sequencing that they used the material for. You could even, instead of flipping your whole class, you could say, okay, I lecture, and maybe 20 minutes, I'm going to try an active learning technique. So I saw Dr. Diamond was saying I could do a think, pair, share for 20 minutes and see how that works. It really is, you can pick little bits and pieces. Other thoughts or questions? I mean, these are all the things we struggle with too. So if you come up with solutions, that would be wonderful, because then you could share with the rest of us how to do it better.